measure how they're doing in life by the stuff they can point at. The money in the account, the title on the business card, the size of the house, the car in the driveway. These are the things that come up at dinner tables and reunions, the ones that show up in the comparisons people make when they're quietly sizing up how they're doing compared to everybody around them. And there's nothing wrong with those things as a way of measuring certain kinds of effort and certain kinds of result. But they're not the only measures out there, and in a lot of cases, they're not even the most important ones. There's another kind of building up happening alongside the money one, and it's slower and quieter and gets talked about a whole lot less. But in the end, it decides way more about how a person's life goes than any amount of money ever will. That building up is reputation. Not reputation in the shallow sense of what people say about you when you're not in the room, though that's part of it. Reputation in the deeper sense of the whole impression your existence leaves on the people who've crossed paths with you. The picture put together from every interaction, every promise you kept, every value you actually showed, every moment you were honest when honesty was hard, every time you showed up when it would have been easier to just disappear. That picture is always being updated, always getting revised by new info, and it's being held in the heads of every person you've ever dealt with seriously. It's your real record, separate from how you see yourself and separate from what you meant to do. It's what you've actually done, not what you've claimed. What makes reputation different from money as a kind of saved up value is the way it compounds. Money compounds through interest and investment, through the basic mechanics of capital working in the background while you sleep. Reputation compounds through something more under the surface, through the way trust opens doors that don't even exist for people who haven't built it yet, through the way a long track record of being reliable creates this assumption in your favor that no single deal could ever produce. Through the way that years of steady character set up a context where people give you the benefit of the doubt without you asking, and hand you opportunities without you having to chase them. That compounding is real and it's powerful. But because it happens slowly, and because it doesn't show up on any spreadsheet, most people don't even think of it as compounding. The other thing that makes reputation different from money is how durable it is. Money can disappear fast. A bad investment, the economy tanking, a lawsuit, a medical disaster. Any of these can wreck a person's financial situation in a hurry. Reputation doesn't work like that. A reputation built over decades through steady behavior doesn't get wrecked by one bad moment, as long as that bad moment really is out of character. People who know your record weigh that record against any single data point. The buildup gives you a buffer that money just doesn't. And the other way around too. A reputation damaged over time through steady bad behavior doesn't get patched up by one good moment either. The buffer cuts both ways. What you've built, you've built. What you've let slide, you've let slide. Both stick around in ways money simply doesn't. There's also the question of what reputation can do that money can't. Money can buy stuff. It can get you comfort, give you options, provide some safety, and solve a lot of practical problems. But money can't make people trust you. It can't make people want to work with you, or let you in on what they're really thinking, or talk you up when nobody's paying them to, or pull you into the kinds of opportunities that never get publicly announced, because they only get offered to people who are known quantities in the right circles. All of that flows from reputation, not from your bank balance. And for most people, over the course of a life, getting access to those things, real trust, being included, opportunities that just kind of show up, produces more of what actually matters than the money alone ever could. The reason this is worth getting clear on is that most people, when they're young and grinding, put pretty much all their effort into the money buildup and almost nothing into the reputation buildup. Not because they're cynical or shady, but because the financial returns are visible and the reputation ones aren't, and human attention naturally goes to whatever it can see. The person who cuts a corner today and pockets an extra $100 has the $100 to show right now. The person who refuses to cut the corner has nothing visible to show at all. What they have is a tiny bit more of something that's going to take years before it's obviously valuable. And in a world that measures progress in quarters and yearly reviews, the invisible long-term buildup is really hard to put ahead of the visible short-term gain. That difficulty is real, and getting past it is exactly what separates the people whose reputations compound from the people whose reputations just sit there. Here's what most people don't really get until they've lived long enough to watch it happen in front of them. Reputation doesn't get built in proportion to your effort. It doesn't respond to campaigns or announcements or any kind of going after it directly. It gets built entirely as a side effect of behavior. Specifically, the behavior you put out when it's not convenient to put it out, when there's no audience watching, when the corner you're deciding whether to cut is so small nobody would even notice or care if you cut it. Those are the moments that build a reputation, not the ones where you're performing for a crowd. The performing for a crowd moments give you an impression. Only the unperformed moments give you an actual reputation. And the difference between the two is exactly what sharp people are trying to figure out when they're deciding how much to trust you. This is why reputation is so hard to fake and so easy to accidentally wreck. You can't build a real reputation by carefully managing your image. Image management makes something that looks like reputation from far away but doesn't hold up when somebody gets close. The person who's spent years curating a specific impression, instead of just behaving the same way all the time, is going to end up, sooner or later, in a situation where that impression and the reality come apart in front of somebody who matters. And once that gap gets seen, it sticks in a way that's way worse than if there'd never been an impression to begin with. People feel a particular and lasting kind of irritation about being lied to. They don't just write off the false impression. They replace it with something a lot worse than neutral. And no amount of image management is undoing that once it's happened. What builds a real reputation is consistency. Not consistency as a performance, but consistency as the natural output of somebody whose behavior actually matches their stated values. The person whose word means exactly what it says, not because they're disciplined about managing their word, but because they actually believe what they say should bind them. The person who treats people the same, whether those people have power over them or not because they've decided it's smart strategy, but because they think everybody deserves basic respect. The person who admits mistakes without an elaborate self-defense, not because they've worked out that being transparent is good strategy, but because hiding stuff genuinely makes them uncomfortable. These people aren't performing consistency. They're just expressing it. And the difference is visible to anybody paying attention, even if they couldn't put words to what they're seeing. The compounding part of this gets clearer when you think about what consistent behavior over a long stretch of time builds in terms of trust. Trust isn't a yes or no thing. It's on a sliding scale, and it moves slowly in both directions. Every interaction with somebody is a tiny data point about how reliable they are, how honest, how good their judgment is, what their character is. Most individual interactions aren't big enough to move the trust reading much in either direction. But across hundreds and then thousands of interactions over years and decades, the readings stack up into something solid, into a settled sense in the heads of the people you've dealt with, of what they can expect from you. That settled expectation is what trust really is at the bottom of it, and it's worth a fortune. Because when people know what to expect from you, they can plan around you. They can pull you into things that need somebody reliable. They can vouch for you to other people without putting themselves on the line. They can offer you things before you ask, because they already know your answer is going to be honorable. That last point is worth chewing on, because it describes something most people have seen but might not have put into words. There are certain people in the world, not many, but they exist, that opportunities seem to gather around without them obviously hustling for it. Things find them. Introductions show up unprompted. Invitations land that they never asked for. Offers appear that they never chased. From outside, these people can look lucky. From up close, They look like they've got some kind of magnetism that other people don't. But what they actually have, almost always, is a reputation that's been quietly building for a really long time. And it's hit the point where the built-up trust is creating its own momentum. People bring stuff to them because they know what they'll get back. The return is predictable, and it's good. And that combo is so rare that people actively go looking for it. None of this is to say money doesn't matter. It matters a ton. And somebody who builds a reputation without also building practical financial sustainability is making a different kind of mistake. The point isn't that reputation is the only thing. The point is that most people treat reputation like a side issue, like it'll take care of itself if they're basically decent, without realizing it takes the same intentional investment that financial success takes, and that the returns on that investment, given enough time, are just as real and a whole lot more durable. The person who builds both, who takes their financial capital and their reputation capital equally seriously, is building something that compounds on two tracks at the same time. And the way those two tracks play off each other over time produces results that neither one alone could have gotten you. So what is reputation capital? It's built from pieces you can identify and consciously develop, not in the sense of performing them for an audience, but in the sense of understanding what they are so you can honestly check whether your behavior is actually producing them. The most basic piece is reliability. Not reliability in the narrow sense of showing up on time, though that matters too, but reliability in the deeper sense that when you say a thing, the thing happens. That your word, once you've given it, doesn't need anyone to chase you for it to get honored. That the people who've dealt with you can plan around your commitments without leaving themselves a backup plan in case you don't come through. This sounds basic. It is rare in practice. The number of people who can really be counted on this way, not usually, not when it's convenient, but consistently, is way smaller than most people would guess. The second piece is honesty. And this needs more careful handling than it usually gets. Because honesty isn't just about not lying. Honest people who never tell flat-out lies can still be deeply unreliable in how they communicate. By telling part of the truth, by leaving out the inconvenient stuff, by letting people walk away with the wrong idea without correcting them. By being open about whatever makes them look good and vague about everything else. Real honesty, the kind that builds the deep part of reputation capital that actually matters, is the kind that tells people what they need to know, even when telling them sucks. That says, I screwed up and here's what happened, without waiting to get caught. That says, I disagree with this and here's why, even when going along with it would be easier. This kind of honesty is not fun to practice, but it's the only kind that builds the trust that matters. The third piece is judgment. Reliability and honesty matter a huge amount, but somebody who's reliable and honest while consistently making bad calls isn't somebody whose reputation is going to compound positively over time. Judgment, being able to read situations accurately, weigh competing factors right, see consequences other people miss, is what turns reliability and honesty from nice personal qualities into something that's actually valuable to other people. Judgment is the piece that makes people want to bring you into their hard decisions, ask you about tough problems, trust your read on situations where the right answer isn't obvious. And judgment, unlike reliability and honesty, mostly gets built through experience, through making decisions, watching how they play out, honestly taking in the feedback, and adjusting. You can't massively speed it up, but you can compound it, because every decision you make and honestly evaluate is a tiny investment in better decisions down the line. The fourth piece is how you handle bad times and failure. This is the one that most separates people whose reputations compound from people whose reputations stagnate. And it's the most visible in real time because everybody runs into hard times and everybody fails at something eventually. The person who handles failure with real accountability, without making it a whole drama, without hunting around for somebody else to blame, who puts their energy into figuring out what went wrong and fixing what can be fixed. That person actually builds reputation capital during the failure, which partly offsets what the failure cost them. The person who handles failure by getting defensive, by passing the blame, by giving you elaborate explanations for why it wasn't really their fault, they damage their reputation in a way that goes way beyond what the failure itself did. People understand that failure happens. What they're watching closely is what kind of character shows up when it does. The fifth piece, and probably the one nobody talks about, is generosity. Not financial generosity, though that's part of it, but generosity with your attention, with credit, with opportunities, with honest praise, with time given to people who have less than you, with access handed to people who haven't earned it yet, but are showing the qualities that say they will. Generous people, people who make introductions they didn't have to make, who say good things about other people without being prompted, who share what they know instead of hoarding it as a competitive edge, who give credit accurately instead of grabbing more than their share. Build a specific and powerful piece of reputation capital that selfish people just can't get to. Because generosity comes back around. It returns in ways you can't predict, in amounts that aren't tied to any one act, but that add up to a social environment where the generous person ends up surrounded by goodwill that was given freely instead of bought or owed. What all five of these have in common is that they're built from behavior, not intention, and they build slowly through the daily piling up of small choices most people make without thinking about how they compound. The person who becomes known for being reliable doesn't make one big, dramatic gesture of keeping their word. They keep it quietly and consistently across hundreds of situations over years, until keeping it is just what they're known for. The reputation is the sum of the small things, built up over time into something no single act could have made and no single failure can entirely tear down. That's compounding. That's the long game. And it's available to anybody willing to play it long enough to see what comes back. There's a moment when your reputation starts walking into rooms before you do. When you walk in and people already have an opinion about you that got formed before you ever got there, based on stuff they heard from people you've dealt with. When opportunities get offered to you not because you went after them, but because somebody who knows your record mentioned you to somebody who needed what you provide. When the work of introducing you gets done in advance by the reputation itself, and you actually showing up is more confirming what was expected than discovering something new. Most people, the first time they experience this, are caught off guard by it. They've been operating in a mode where they had to prove themselves in every new context, where every new relationship started from scratch and had to get built from zero through direct demonstration. And then, at some point, the dynamic flips. The blank slate gets replaced with a baseline expectation that's generally good. And the work of the first interaction shifts from establishing yourself to just not contradicting what's already been established. That shift feels different from anything before it, because it's the point where the capital you've built up starts paying out returns that aren't tied to any specific current effort. What this means in practice is that the value of a strong reputation isn't fully visible until it's been building long enough to hit this point. Before that point, the reputation is doing real work. It's affecting small decisions and quiet judgments in ways that produce better outcomes. But the effect is spread out and hard to see. After the point, the effect gets visible and concentrated. The doors that open are obvious. The unsolicited introductions are obvious. The level of people who want to be associated with you shifts in a way you can actually see. And what was getting quietly stacked up for years suddenly becomes visibly valuable in a way that makes it clear why the long investment was worth making. The danger at this moment, and it's a real danger that stops the compounding for a lot of people, is getting lazy. When the reputation's built to the point where it's generating its own momentum, there's a temptation to ease up on the behaviors that built it, to treat what you've built up as some permanent thing that doesn't need maintenance. It's not permanent. Reputation, like every other kind of capital, can be run down. Not fast in most cases, but steadily, through the same slow compounding process, except in reverse. Consistent behaviors that don't match the established reputation start stacking up their own data points. Enough new data points pointing the other direction gradually shift the settled expectation. The reputation doesn't fall apart overnight, but it erodes. An erosion that goes on long enough eventually turns into collapse. At which point rebuilding it is way harder and slower than the original building was. The people who keep strong reputations across a whole lifetime aren't the ones who built them and then relaxed. They're the ones who got that. The behaviors that built the reputation weren't a tool for the reputation. They were just expressions of actual values. And they keep going naturally because the values keep going. They don't have to remember to keep their word because keeping their word isn't a strategy for them. It's just what they do. They don't have to manage the impression they're making because there's no gap between the impression and reality to manage. The reputation is a side effect of who they actually are, and it keeps compounding as long as they keep being that person, which is forever. This is the deepest point about reputation as a thing you build up. The most valuable reputations don't get built through any kind of calculation or strategy. They get built through consistently expressing real values over a long enough stretch of time that the expression and the values become the same thing to anyone paying attention. The strategic reputation builder is always one crisis away from getting exposed, always managing the gap between what they project and what they are. The person whose reputation flows naturally from their character has no gap to manage. They can walk into any room, face any kind of scrutiny, and come out fine, because what's there under examination isn't different from what's been shown. That consistency, that fit between the seen self and the unseen self, is the most durable thing a person can build, and it takes a lifetime. But so does everything worth having. Now, I want you to think about how patience and building reputation capital go together, because patience isn't a natural human virtue. It's something you have to choose over and over against the pull of a culture that rewards speed and visibility and short-term wins, that celebrates the quick payoff and the dramatic move and the overnight success. That culture gives almost no support to the person building something that won't show its real value for 10 years or more. The whole incentive structure is built for the short game. And choosing the long game inside a system designed for the short one takes a clarity of purpose most people never have to develop, because most people never choose the long game in the first place. The patience it takes to build reputation isn't passive patience. It's not the patience of waiting for something to happen to you. It's the active patience of continuing to make the right call in the small moments, day after day, when the right call has no visible payoff and the wrong one has a visible one. It's the patience of the person who could cut the corner and knows they could cut it and chooses not to. Not because anybody's watching, but because they understand what they're building and they understand that the corner counts. That kind of patience is a discipline, and it's one of the rarest and most valuable disciplines a person can develop, because it's exactly the discipline that the short-term incentive structure of the world is designed to wear down. What helps you keep it up is a clear understanding of how the mechanism works. When you get that reputation compounds, that the small choices don't just add up, they multiply over time, that the effect of consistent behavior isn't linear, but exponential. The patience gets easier to keep going. Because the payoff isn't abstract anymore. It's a specific future state that's directly hooked to your present behavior through a mechanism you actually understand. You're not being asked to be patient forever. You're being asked to make an investment with a specific return you can demonstrate on a timeline that's longer than most people are willing to commit to, in a currency that's less visible than money but more durable. There's also the question of what you lose when you trade reputation capital for short-term gain. This is a trade people make all the time, usually without fully accounting for what they're giving up. The person who shades the truth to close a deal faster gets the deal and loses something off their reputation for honesty. A loss that might not show up for years, but that will show up. The person who takes credit for work that wasn't entirely theirs gets the immediate recognition and loses something off their reputation for integrity, which the people who know the real story carry around with them indefinitely. The person who walks out on a commitment when something better shows up gets the better thing and loses something off their reputation for being reliable. These trades aren't invisible. They register. They register in the heads of specific people who carry that information forward into future interactions and future decisions about who they trust and who they recommend and who they include. The long view on this is sobering, and it clears things up. Every interaction with every person is a small transaction in a currency most people aren't tracking carefully. And the balance in that currency is being kept by other people, whether you're paying attention to it or not. The person who pays attention to it, who gets that every interaction is either adding to or subtracting from something real and durable, and who makes choices accordingly, has access to a compounding process most people are leaving entirely up to chance. That process, taken seriously over a lifetime, builds something that can't be inherited, can't be bought, can't be manufactured, and can't be quickly destroyed by anybody, including yourself. It can only get built, slowly, through the daily piling up of small choices most people don't bother making carefully, because the returns are too slow and too quiet to seem like they're worth the effort. They are worth the effort. They've always been worth the effort. And the people who got that early and behaved accordingly are the ones whose names still mean something long after the people who chose the short game have been completely forgotten.